What do you do if you can understand a lot of a foreign language, but you still can't speak it? I've heard a lot of stories of people passing the highest levels of proficiency tests, but they still can't speak the language. And I experienced something similar to this because I come from a Puerto Rican family. My parents both speak Spanish, but I was never able to speak the language. But when I went to go learn Japanese, well, I figured out what I needed to do to go from nothing to being able to speak a language and speaking it fluently. So when I got a comment from someone with a similar story, I thought it was a perfect time to explain the process from going to not being able to speak the language to being able to speak the language. And for a little backstory, this is from the person who commented asking for advice. He said, "I'm mixed Canadian and Mexican. I was born in Mexico, but I lived in Canada since I was about 2 years old. As you can hopefully tell, I'm fluent in English, but I was never able to say the same for Spanish. I grew up with my father, native Mexican, speaking to me about 50% in Spanish and the other 50% in English. And my mother, all in English, native to Canada. Unfortunately, I never would try to speak Spanish for myself, but I would hear it every day without fail. Because of this, I have quite an extensive vocabulary in the language, but I was never able to learn anything more than the most common phrases. It is a strange phenomenon, as I'm able to understand nearly 100% of everything my father speaks to me in Spanish. When I try to speak it, I simply am at a loss for what to say. I get it. This is hard. This is actually why I quit Spanish in the first place, because I was studying, and I could understand a lot, but when it came time to speak, I couldn't get my words out. So I ended up learning Japanese instead, because I figured if I could learn something that is completely different than anything I knew, well, then I could figure out what I was doing wrong. So this is what I learned during my time learning Japanese. So there are 4 core skills to learning a language: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. If you are struggling in any one of these skills, it simply means you haven't spent enough time practicing that skill. So when we're learning a language, we usually focus on listening, reading, and writing, and we figure speaking will just come along. It doesn't work that way. You have to practice speaking as its own skill. So what do we do for speaking practice? Do we just go around talking to a bunch of native speakers? Well, yeah, you can do that, but I would argue that this is not practice unless the other person is giving you direct feedback on how to correct yourself. But most of the time when you're speaking with native speakers, they're not looking to correct everything that you say. And also, not everyone will be able to be in Mexico and speak with native speakers every day. So what can you do to practice on your own and actually improve? So a simple way to naturally grow your spoken language is to simply collect phrases that are useful in day-to-day life. There was a method called mimicking, where you can listen to an audio clip of a native speaker and you can mimic what they say. I actually found this practice to be so valuable that I created a tool specifically to do this practice on a website called mizas.com. Here you can save audio clips directly from videos on desktop, or you can save audio clips from our public database. Then you could use these audio clips to listen and record yourself so you can listen back and correct yourself and improve your pronunciation. So what helped me the most when I was learning to speak Japanese is that I just found a ton of these phrases and I just kept mimicking them until they felt natural. In a sense, you want to overlearn them. That way, when you come across a situation in real life, you can just copy the phrase you already know. There is no shame in copying. The reason why most people aren't able to speak is because they're stuck trying to reconstruct the language in their head. I didn't do that. Instead, I focus on picking out key phrases and then swapping out words to make something new. For example, I could take the sentence, "I went to the store." So for me, I would just practice this phrase until it feels natural. Then I could start swapping out the word store to change its meaning. So this phrase can turn into, "I went to the park," or "I went to the movie theater." Once you have the structure there, it makes it much easier to create new things because all you have to do is swap out a single word from that phrase. Now, I do want to note, while you're doing this, it'll probably feel like you're saying the same phrases over and over again while you're actually talking to native speakers, and that is okay. I met a lot of people who are worried about sounding too repetitive, but most language is actually very repetitive. We just notice it differently because we're learning the language for the first time. After that, it's simply about trying to maximize the number of phrases you're familiar with. In Japanese, it took me about 10,000 phrases to feel fluent in the language, but that's because it was a brand new language to me. If you have more experience in a language, well, you could probably go a lot farther with a lot less. And as you learn more phrases, you could be more creative with real conversations. You could swap out words in real time. It's like learning to play music. The best way to learn is to play music by great musicians and learn what made them good. Then you could take those skills and then create something new from them yourself. I actually made a video about just that. If you want to take the same tricks that musicians use to learn music and apply that to language learning, then you could go watch that video over there. This video is mainly about pronunciation, but it does use the mimic method. So if you want to get a more detailed approach on how to do that, you could go watch that video, and I'll see you over there.